Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another Critique of the Week. Thanks so much for joining me. It is July 12th. A pleasure as always to be here, going over poems, talking about what works and what doesn't, how we're moved and persuaded by the musical energy of the lines of verse. That's what you find here on the Critique of the Week. Let's see, who do we have in the house? It's a great crowd on YouTube, as YouTube's really became the dominant force of streaming here for us on the Critique. We've got Steve Harrell here, Katie Dozier downstairs, we got Dr. Q, Ruth Kennedy's here, Winston Munn, Michelle Noble, Nancy Sabanik, Maria Berg's here, Nate Jacob, hey Nate, we've got Annie Blanchard, Tom Barlow, we've got Gary Rosen, if I didn't say that already, Rebecca Cates, if I didn't say that already, Cindy Guntherman is here, Dick Westheimer back from a very busy month, hey Dick, Holly's here, Deb T, we got Amy Dower Solorzano, Hamet Malak, Brian O'Sullivan's here, Patty Arbor, Shauna Gammons, James Spencer, Bethany Jarmel, hey Bethany, Annie Blanchard's here, I think I already said Annie. Over on Facebook, which does not have the reach it once did, we got Nate Jacob doing double duty. We got John Atkinson and Nikita Park. Good to see Nikita. She was a guest in the Rattlecast back in the day. All right, so good to see you all. I'm going to go through the oldest submissions in the queue. How this works, if you'd like to have your poems critiqued, and please do, all you got to do is go to rattle.com/critique. You'll see the submission link there. If you're somebody who participates and helps other people improve their poetry every Friday, if I recognize your name, we'll move you to the front of the line. If not, we'll just go in the order they were received. Today is one of those days we're going in the order received. Hey, good timing. And first, before we do that, though, I would like to remind everybody that this is the last weekend before the Rattle Poetry Prize deadline, which is coming up on Monday, July 15th. That deadline is till midnight Pacific time, so technically it might be into the 16th a little bit if you're on the East Coast or in Europe or something like that. Once again, the Rattle Poetry Prize is $15,000 this year for a single poem. It's been that way for a few years. $25,000 in total prizes, too, as we give $5,000 to the runner-up, which is chosen by a reader vote, the Reader's Choice Award, and we also give $500 each to 10 finalists. So $25,000 in total prizes. The entry fee is only a subscription. Probably most people watching know about it, but just in case, if you're just passing by, it's a good thing to be aware of. You have a few days to get your poems polished up and submitted. The entry fee, of course, is just a year's subscription in print to Rattle. It's our main fundraiser for the year. It's like a subscription drive. Really, I mean, the truth is it doubles the number of subscribers we get to have, which is great, sending more poetry around everywhere. It provides a whole bunch. About half the money goes toward the award and filling the subscriptions, and the other half goes to funding other parts of the show, like Critique of the Week, like Poet Respond, like the Prompt Lines, Prompt Poet of the Month, like the Ekphrastic Challenge, like the Rattle Young Poets Anthology. All those things are funded through the Rattle Poetry Prize. Basically, the more entries we get, the more stuff we can do to further our mission to promote the practice of poetry. So anyway, like I was saying, we're going to go through the oldest submissions in the queue this time. And, as always, leave as many comments as you can. Tell us what your thoughts are. Tell us, what works, what doesn't. I'll share as many comments as you can. Any suggestions for title changes, words that feel off, your favorite lines, anything you want to share. It's really valuable feedback for poets. It's not a place where you get dozens and dozens of people telling us how you actually think about our poems with no filters. We're all trying to be nice. We're all trying to be friendly and helpful, but we're also being honest, and that's really not a thing that is easy to find for a poet. So it's very valuable. Let's see what we've got. We're going to start with Mona Krishnan from San Jose, California. And she pasted a poem, I should say, called Transformations into the Body of the Form. And no specific questions, so let's take a look at this poem. Once again, the poem is called, here, I'll put it on the screen. The poem is called Transformations up there in the title field. And here's the poem, Transformations. The year ended in silence, and a new one arrived in silence. Perhaps the stillness is a conversation on imagination, on hopes, not fears, and longing for a few days without the anguish of tears and sorrow. I just want to breathe and walk away my human self and fly like a bird into the wilderness that I love so much. There against the darkening sky, I can feel the touch of sun and shade on my body, awakening the light and the love that exists in a hidden grove of trees. So some interesting things to point out here really quickly. I think can you feel, I think everybody watching this can you feel that where the images emerge, where a story and some kind of visuals kind of emerge, that's where the poem takes off, no pun intended. The poem is called Transformation, and that's where the transformation actually happens. The poem is kind of pretty flat in the beginning. The year ended in silence, and a new one arrived in silence. I think that's a good start, as long as you go somewhere interesting right away from that point. But instead we get a lot more of that, nothing to sort of grab onto, nothing tangible to hold, no way to enter the poem. Perhaps the stillness is a conversation on imagination. We get these generalities on imagination, on hopes, not fears. So you get the hopes and fears, the kind of cliche phrase is there in there. Not fears and longing for a few days. So we don't know who's longing, what they're longing about. We don't really get anything to grab onto in this section right here. And then without anguish of tears and sorrow. And again, tears and sorrow, these, cliche type hackney language that doesn't really add anything. So I think this line, if we go, it's a good start if we move somewhere visual, somewhere concrete, somewhere we can feel and enter at that point. But this part is a wrong turn because it doesn't take us anywhere. Like a dead end road. I just want to breathe and walk away my human self and fly like a bird into the wilderness. So the fly like a bird into the wilderness, even though fly like a bird's a bit of a cliche, that is at least something we can see. We can start to experience a little bit. And then that extends and ends up with a nice last line in a hidden grove of trees. So that's really where the heart of the poem is. But why, who is it? Who is the speaker? Who's telling me this? Why are they telling me this? Who am I to listen to this? All those things are kind of ambiguous, and why, what the year has been. Brian O'Sullivan says, what kind of bird? And that's a really good point, too. I mean, if we can latch onto this, one part we have is the year ended in silence, it began in silence. I feel like a bird that wants to escape, kind of. So describe that bird, dive into that. As Brian O'Sullivan says, what kind of bird? Start describing the bird, start describing the trees. Let us enter and feel that. And you're navigating around to think about what the actual emotion is that compelled you to write this poem in the first place, and explore that. Katie Dozier points out she loves this, and it's a great concept from Billy Collins. There's a Billy Collins concept called the Big E on the eye chart. It's a good place to start a poem. But this poem stays in that level of the eye chart instead of going deeper. It's a good way to put it. So Billy Collins says to start out with some big thing that's easy to see and really clear. And that's what I talk about when I talk about there needs to be some kind of tether, something to hold on to. You kind of have to know a bit about the situation and the place you're in. So he says start with a big E on the eye chart. And then the letters can get smaller and more fine as you go, but you always have that E to anchor on. But here it doesn't go anywhere more fine. It sort of just presents the image, and then and that's kind of it. So we want to dig into this and know more of the story. I say this over and over again, but it's always the case. We want to hear your stories, and we don't get to hear any of what's actually going on. It's all covered by abstraction. So let us know the story. Let us know who's speaking to us and why. Amy Dower Solorzano says, I want to see more of the wilderness that I love so much as a great place for some images. Yeah, that too. Winston Munn says it has a nice overall tone to it, but needs specificity. Another good way to put it. Brian Sullivan, too, it might be good to try longer lines. I'm not sure if the poem needs to move so slowly. Yeah, that's the thing, too. I mean, we really want to have... One of the things you want to think about... you can think about a poem. I've never used this analogy before, but I think it works. You can think about a poem as like instructions for building the miracle. We have a poem called Instructions for Building the Miracle, I think, in Rattle. But if you're looking think about instructions... and every piece of instruction is a step toward building the thing. And so you wouldn't want to have a step in the instruction manual that didn't have a purpose, that didn't add and contribute. So you want every line to be contributing something to the final product, which is the build of this mental structure, which is the poem, and that emotional state and that place we're going to. So every line should have some kind of like way that it drives the building process forward. And when you have short lines, it's possible to do that with short lines, but it's harder to get actual content in the lines. It starts to feel like the lines are sort of, a waste of time, kind of like a step in instructions that didn't do anything. If every third step it said, move your coffee cup from one side of the table to the other, and then on step 7 it said, move it back, and it did nothing, then that's kind of how it feels sometimes reading poems when they don't progress the building of the object, of the artifact. So make sure lines have content, and if it's hard, if you're having lines that are much in there for no reason, the lines are probably too short, because there should be something that is pushing the poem forward every time. It's a shove. You think of every line is a shove forward into something, and that's how we transform. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next poet. It's some good advice there in general. Thanks for sharing that once again. And the poet was a Monica Krishnan with Transformation. Okay, let's go to another poem, and maybe I'll label this so I know it's here. And let's go next to Kimberly McNeil. So Kimberly McNeil is an exception. She's here a good amount of time. I didn't move her up because she's been on the Critique of the Week before too. So I kind of would do that. And there's a limit on 2. Some people submit over and over and over again. We have that rule: don't submit into any categories in Rattle until you've heard back, kind of. And in this case, it's until your poems were critiqued. If you want to withdraw and resubmit, that's fine. But if you have a whole bunch in the queue, not that Kimberly did this, but some people do. Some people have, like, you'll see, as I'm scrolling through, there'll be like a whole bunch of people, and I have to screen out and say, hey, don't send that many poems. It's too much. But if you've done some in the past, like Kimberly has, I might not move you up in the line like I would with other people, but I might. It depends on the situation. But Kimberly here is here. Anyway, Kimberly's from Sarasota, Florida. Her poem is Mrs. Davis. No general questions for Kimberly, so let's take a look at this. Here, Mrs. Davis. Nobody knew where Mrs. Davis was. She disappeared from summer school, left her garden brown and barren. Someone like her, we said. A postcard she sent us mysteriously read, I am still alive, I am not dead. Chorus. Still alive, I thought. Moved back in with her ex, they cheered. Her fan club thought they knew Mrs. Davis. Fourth grade teacher, pale, the redhead family gal, growing summer gardens with her students, smiling in public, promising in private, pretty Mrs. Davis. Chorus. She's still alive, I thought. Moved back in with her ex, they cheered. Her fan club thought they knew Mrs. Davis. And so that is the poem. That is Mrs. Davis by Kimberly McNeil. And let's see. So Mrs. Davis. So we talked about having some kind of big E. I mean, that example of the eye chart, having the big E at first. This does have a nice big E. Mrs. Davis is somebody we can stick a pin on that, and know there's somebody there named Mrs. Davis. Nobody knew where Miss Davis was, so it sets up a situation right away. We're in the poem, so it's a good entry to the poem. She disappeared from summer school, so we kind of know the story. Mrs. Davis was a teacher. Well, she could have been a student, but I assume with Mrs. Davis. She disappeared from summer school, left her garden barren and brown, and so the nice detail too. So we know Miss Davis left, then we get an image, we get to see it a little bit. So left her garden barren and brown. So unlike her. By the way, if there's a punctuation goes inside the quotes, so a comma would normally go in here. But if you don't have 2 punctuations in a row either, so you would just delete this comma. Just a little style guide lesson there. So unlike her, the exclamation point does the function of the comma already. So we would delete that comma, and we still just have we said. Because we know it's the same sentence, because the we is lowercase though. A postcard she sent us mysteriously read, I am still alive, I am not dead. So here was the first place where the poem, it feels a little clunky in the way that this line is read out. A postcard she sent us mysteriously read. There's the lack of music in the I am still alive. It's the lack of contractions and the shortness of those 2 sentences, I am not dead, and the way that the dead reads red, it rhymes with red. that feels sort of forced to fit a rhyme in a way that feels off to me. It doesn't feel natural. And one of the things we're looking for is the natural music of speech. And so so that's something that I would change this section. But I'm curious, though, at the same time, about this postcard, and I would like to know more. I'd like to know more of the story, what the postcard looked like. Again, I mean, those details are great. Like we had the garden, Barron and Brown. What did the postcard look like? Give us some more to go on so it can really stick in with us. Let me shift to chorus. It's interesting to add, a chorus in there. I think we have one poem that has a really nice refrain that works kind of like a chorus. Gosh, it's by Ken Measle, I think, and the poem is about a boxer. It was one of the Rattle Poetry Prize finalists back, maybe like 2006. Something about a bell, I don't know. But there was a nice refrain that repeated in a chorus type way. But the nice thing about that was it had a lot of content in that. It was a very vivid musical line. And so that worked. And you want a chorus to sort of change your thoughts about it every time as you're moving through in a poem on the page. A chorus, and the point of a chorus in a song is kind of like to have a hook that makes you like sing along and want to keep listening to the song over and over again, But that doesn't really work in poetry. I mean, it's possible to get a hook, but that has to be really, really poetically musical, poetically memorable. And I think that line, maybe I can find that poem. Let's see. Rattle Poetry. Was it Ken Measle? Maybe it wasn't Ken Measle. Poetry Prize. Was it Ken Measle? I don't think it was. Maybe it wasn't. Well, I'm in trouble to remember this poem. I don't think it's going to work. Yeah, it wasn't Ken Measle. Anyway. But you can have a refrain in poems if there's a musical aspect to it, I would say. If there's something that's really memorable about that line, it can work, where it like sinks deeper every time, kind of. Like you can think of it like as a nail that every time you go through, like striking it deeper and making it resonate more. I think there's a way you can do that with a refrain in a poem. But in this poem, the chorus is sort of kind of flat. She's still alive, I thought. Moved back in with her ex, they cheered. Her fan club thought. So we have thought and thought too, that repetition. And then they knew Mrs. Davis. Her fan club thought they knew Mrs. Davis. So there's no rhyme. There's not a lot of music. That doesn't really add a whole lot. So I'm not sure what this serves as a chorus type thing, as a refrain in the poem. And then and have it more detailed. We want details. I want more of the story. The fourth grade teacher pal, the redhead family gal. Now it's starting to, we get this rhyme where we didn't have a lot of rhyme before. We had the dead red, but that's it. So we get a rhyme here. And if you're going to have rhyme, have it rhyme all the time. But fourth grade teacher pal, the redhead family gal, growing summer gardens with her students, smiling in public, promising in private, pretty Mrs. Davis. So how much does this add? I mean, if the chorus was bringing something home and had a lot of music to it, little bits like that where you get to see more backstory, if we had a bunch of the verses like that, I think could work. But then you get the chorus again. And so again, similar to the last poem, we don't really get the story. I want to know what the card looked like. I want to know where she actually was. What happened. Give me some follow-up, some resolution. Let's see. Yeah, James Spencer says it promises a kind of Richard Cory twist, but doesn't deliver. Purpose to the story. There seems no purpose to the story. Exactly. And so what happened? What actually happened? It feels very incomplete. Like it feels like a song that we only got the first 2 verses when there's 8. Like where are the rest? Keep going and keep using specific details and tell more of the story. Tell the whole story and make the chorus interesting. I think those are my 2 suggestions there, but interesting start to the poem for sure. That was Mrs. Davis by Kimberly McNeil. Next we will go to Shavi Dixit. Shavi is from India, from Indore. And Pink Tree and one other poem. So we're going to have 2 poems for Shivi. And it's nice to send 2 poems when you submit, because that way we sort of get more of a what's that word? What's that word where you get like 2 points, and you get the signal. You can tell they're either there or there, how far away. Triangulation, that's not the right word. But anyway, we get more of a read on the poetry. We can be more helpful if we see 2 poems. So it's always nice. And Shivi included 2. So here we go. First one, very short. Pink Tree. By the side of the road, keeping to self, callous cacophony of the concrete jungle in all its motor beasts, I found winter resting on a lone pink tree. So that's interesting. Pink Tree. By the side of the road, keeping to itself, callous cacophony of the concrete jungle and all its motor beasts, I found winter resting in a lone pink tree. There's a nice tanka-like quality. It's 5 lines. Tankas usually would be 4. But there's the difference between, if you want to talk about the difference between haiku and tanka, which is something we haven't really done very much. Tanka tells a bit of a story in those 5 lines, whereas haiku is instantaneous. It's these 2 worlds, 2 patterns overlaying in an interesting way. Tanka have a similar brevity, but tell a little story in 5 lines, and this kind of works in that regard. Yeah, nice C alliteration. Yeah. Yeah, Nancy Sabanek, and this is a good question. I'm curious how a chorus poem differentiates from song lyrics. And I don't know if there is. I mean, poems are songs. And they're songs that, in the music of speech usually, and not, intended with accompaniment, not intended with, it's stripped down, stripped of melody, stripped of beat and time like music would have. But otherwise, it's still there, and some poems work as songs. Shel Silverstein, A Boy Named Sue, things like that are actually good poems. I interviewed Ani DeFranco for the fall issue coming up, and she has a children's book called The Knowing, and that is actually a song. The children's book is a song on her album. It's kind of a poem, and kind of a children's book, too. There's a lot of crossover in all those genres. Okay. Anyway, so Pink Tree. So there's some nice elements to this. By the side of the road, keeping to itself. So if we get there's a haiku quality to that beginning. By the side of the road, keeping to itself. I think that's really nice. I think callous cacophony of the concrete jungle is a little bit too much. There's nice alliteration there, but I think cacophony of the concrete jungle is nice. But I think it's a little forced to have all those C's. Callous cacophony of concrete. It really highlights itself. And then also the line break here on jungle is a bit trippy. Like, it doesn't feel very natural, and I would put the jungle up here. But I like the image, though. So by the side of the road, keeping to itself, callous cacophony of the concrete jungle and all its motor beasts, I found winter resting. And I like the idea of I found winter resting on a lone pink tree. Yeah. Oh, I am reading it wrong. Thanks. Deb T points out I keep saying itself. Keeping to self. By the side of the road, keeping to self. Yeah, that feels unnatural. I think it should be itself. I think that's one of those where I was reading it wrong because it feels like a typo. I think it should just be keeping to itself. Katie Doder says, is there an extended metaphor title here after the divorce? Is there a suggestion? So something like that instead of Pink Tree. And again, and that's where I was going to go eventually, is the Pink Tree, ending on the Pink Tree, but having Pink Tree the title. It makes it so that it doesn't really add anything to have the title. So why not use the title for some purpose? And Katie suggests this, putting the situation as the reason and the explanation for what's actually going on to be in that title, so that we get to know the actual situation. And so she suggests, for example, after the divorce. And imagine if there was like that. How different and how good this poem would be in comparison if we got that detail after the divorce. After the divorce, by the side of the road, keeping to itself, cacophony of the concrete jungle and all its motor beasts, I found winter resting on a lone pink tree. And then we get that. Yeah. And DeQuesterman says, good idea, Katie, make this less of a mystery by making the poem metaphor for the title. Yeah. Brian O'Sullivan says, I like the callous cacophony so much that I wonder if the poem could be revised as into 4-beat alliterative verse. That's true. I do like the callous cacophony. I think the concrete's a little too much. Maybe cutting out the concrete instead of cutting out callous. But yeah, I wonder if you could do that. I mean, every time you can take a poem and find form, the poem is much better. Sidney Guntherman suggests, all those cars, I find winter resting on a lone pink tree. And that's a very nice haiku. Yeah. Okay. So, so I think, to me, I would play with ways of making it, 5 lines. I like the idea of some kind of form. And alliterative verse is really cool if you want to really pile on with the alliteration. That's nice. Brian mentioned liking a smattering of rhyme, too. Thoughts here? Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you can add some form to a poem, it makes the poem come to life. Yeah. Yeah, with near, yeah, Deb T says sweet would be near rhyme with beasts. Yeah, things like that. Katie says, Katie Dozier, I'm not a fan of cacophony unless the language throughout is pretty elevated. It always hits me as trying to sound highfalutin. Yeah, and that's and the thing is that this line, because it's playing up the alliteration, ends up being out of register with the rest of the poem, and it really feels like unnatural. And again, we want to forget that we're reading a poem. We want to be so absorbed in the way somebody is speaking at us that we lose our sense of self and our everything, and forget that we're reading a poem. And you can do that in 6 lines, but you have to have a consistent tone and register to the poem so we can get lost in it. Dr. Q says, as someone who writes lengthy poems, I like the brevity. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on, but that's an interesting poem. Let's look at the other one. We'll see how similar it is. 20th August, 2022. And that's the title, the date. Beneath the outward-facing balcony of mine, I see a couple walking west, and above them, the eastward expansion of sun's orange that flashes pink as a nimbostratus were Krishna's fingers. Across the street, the lamplights halogen. Then there are chirps, croaks, and rattling feathers that call out for a friend or a deity, or are perhaps admissions of one's love. The brass bells now ring, overlapping them. The veil of dispersing gray tangles itself with moss atop the towering cement behemoths, crown of whom rests drenched under the sky that insists upon its secrets. So some really nice lines there. You can see, make sure there's nothing else. So you can see, those nice lines that came out in the last poem, and there were some nice lines there. Even more here. It's a nice thing about seeing 2 poems. You can see the things that the poems have in common that are working, in the poems, things that have to work on. And so I think, again, the clarity is an issue. And 20th August 2022 doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not sure. I mean, did anything big happen then? Probably a personal, let's see. And it was a Saturday. Looking for like any kind of special things that happened that day. Some war in Ukraine, that chemical plant or that nuclear plant in Ukraine that was under threat. I don't know. So that date, it probably has personal significance, but we have no idea. And we need to know to be able to access and experience the poem. So like Katie suggested with the first poem, a title like After the Divorce that situates us, instead of the date, something that would help us along would be really helpful. Let's see. So Amy Dower Solorzano says, opening is a little clunky. We could start with something as simple as, from the balcony, I see a couple walking west. Let's check out the opening lines again. So the title, which really is just like, you read it and then it doesn't stick at all. It's like nothing ever happened. Like you never actually read it. It's like a label. And it would be just, okay. Beneath the outwards facing balcony of mine, I see a couple walking west, and above them, the eastward expansion of sun's orange that flushes pink as though a nimbostratus were Krishna's fingers. I really like the description there. I love that. Yeah, as Petty Arbor says, stopped by outward-facing balcony. Aren't all balconies outward-facing? And then it didn't, yeah. And Amy's already got this, why not just have it from the balcony, I see a couple walking west. And yeah, so a balcony of mine, the of mine is sort of weirdly extraneous. It doesn't feel like a normal thing you'd say. So beneath the balcony, I see a couple walking west is a much better way to start it. And then we get this really wonderful image. Above them, the eastward expansion of Sun's Orange. I like the expansion. The idea that it's moving is really nice because it is. It's slowly adjusting as time goes on. Of the Sun's Orange that flashes pink as though the nimbostratus were Krishna's fingers. And that's a really nice description and metaphor there. Across the street, the lamp lights halogen. Then there are chirps, croaks, and rattling feathers that call out for a friend or a deity or perhaps admissions of, I wouldn't say one's love, I would just say love here. Admissions of love. The brass bells now ring, overlapping them. So we get this whole scene unfolding from the balcony. We get the sunset, then we get the sounds, the lights turn on, we get the other sounds. It's nice. The veil of dispersing gray tangles itself with moss atop the towering cement behemoths. Cement behemoths, I think, are other buildings. But I think there we lose the thread a little bit. I think cement behemoths are a little much there without more description of that. Crown of whom rests drenched under the sky that insists upon its secrets. Yeah. So, again, this poem feels a lot like Pink Tree, where there's really nice lines, nice descriptions, concise language that's doing a lot of work. But we don't get any access to what's actually going on. And so if we had something like After the Divorce, or just some kind of situational title that let us feel what it was, we could understand the extended metaphor more. Yeah. Yeah, and as someone pointed out, I saw out of the corner of my eye, the crown of whom, that's rose, the crown of whom doesn't work. Yeah, and that's a bit wrong. Cindy says, I like the sky insisting on secrets. And I like that too. But so we don't have any kind of frame, though, for what the secrets might be. And so, yeah, exactly, After the Divorce too. If we're let into the situation, we'd be able to appreciate the poem more. Okay, but we're going to move on. Yeah. So other things. So let us into the story. And both these submissions, and it just happens so much. This is one of the reasons why I want to do Critique in the Week in the first place. We've been doing it for 6.5 years now, I think. And it's always because there's just these simple things. People they submit poems to Rattle. I don't have time to tell them all anything about it because we just have to move through poem after poem and reply and read and reply. And you see so often these things just where the story is not told. We don't get access to it, and so we can't appreciate it, and we want to. I'm not talking about Rattle. I'm talking about like readers in general. If we read something, we want to be able to access and engage it. And so often the poems are left out, or the stories are left out of the poems, I should say. So let us in. Let us know what's actually happening so we can actually feel along with you. That's the whole point of poetry, to have someone here thinking, having access to the things and knowing we're not alone. And that's kind of what poetry is all about. So let us in. Let us know the stories. Give us some of the context so we can appreciate the feelings. And, that's one of the reasons why AI is never going to be able to write a poem. It's because we have all these associations and connotations, and our brains are subjective and associative, And so, you can show a picture of a sunset, but it doesn't mean anything without like people in there, in a context and a meaning and a time and a viewer and all those things swirling around associated with it. And we need those kind of contextual details so we can feel what the sunset feels like to experience, It's all tied together in this big tangly web, and we need the whole web or else we don't get to experience anything. And so let us in on some of the story. Okay, next up, let's go to... There are 3 deep here in the Critique of the Week, and we're up to, I should mention the dates too, we're up to July 23rd. Partha Sarkar is one of those poets who included a whole bunch of poems, regularly submits. And I should point out, we haven't done Partha Sarkar in a long time, but there's more submissions from Partha coming up. We're not going to look at those because it's just too many. You have to send 2 at a time. Don't submit until you have a second one, until we've actually talked about your poems. And then that spaces it out so everybody gets a chance. But anyway, we'll do this because it's been like a couple years, a year and a half or so since we've done Partha. And we won't do the future poems I see out of the corner of my eye coming up either. But anyway, Imminent Failure. Burning Jupiter in the skull with the deep fake faith of death is bitter. The rotten globe yet smiles a dawn with stale blood of the stone clad in a ruthless gown. The drooping mob. Then who can lead the fleeting reed? Only soft coffin in the bitter inn. So nice sounds, kind of similar to the last poet again, in that I'm not sure exactly where to situate it. The imminent failure is a pretty abstract concept, a little bit to go on. So failure of what makes me wonder, but some failure is imminent, so we can think on that at least. A bit of a jumping off point. Burning Jupiter in the skull with a deep fake faith, a death is bitter. And that's in quotes. So I'm really just not sure what to do with that. Burning Jupiter. I don't know how Jupiter could burn. That's like the god of Jupiter or something. I'm not sure. In the skull with a deep fake faith. A deep fake faith. I'm trying to get my head around that concept. A death is bitter. Then we have the rotten globe. Did the rotten globe say that? Like, I don't understand the quotes around that first stanza, so I'm just a little lost. Yeah, Rose says I'm a bit lost. Deb T says lost. Yeah. So there's nice phrases, but I don't know how to connect them together. Yet, so who's saying this? Yet smiles a dawn with stale blood of the stone clad in a ruthless gown. The drooping mob. Is that the drooping mob that's in the ruthless gown, or is that the drooping mob saying that? It's just really hard to follow. Yeah, Gary Rawson says this is a dialogue. And then we get this last one in quotes too. Then who can lead the fleeting reed? Only soft coffin in the bitter inn. Only soft coffin in the bitter inn. So I'm just not sure where to put any of this. And Nate Jacob says this is either about global warming or divorce. Yeah, I don't know what it's about. So we don't get enough to figure out. And that's the theme of the day. Themes emerge kind of every week. And just tell us more. Let us in. You're telling us we should read this, but then not letting us in to the story, to what's actually going on. Yeah, Ruth Katie says this has a stylized feel, but not a message or story we can get a handle on. That's a great way to put it, Ruth. Yeah, Amy Dower Solorzano says, or Solorzano, I should say Solorzano. Sorry, I would have trouble with that accent. Mark. Solorzano, that's how it should be, I guess. I'm not able to make any real narrative or connections, but I think if the poet can bring us in more, I think they are great with their sounds and evoking a mood. I think that's true. Yeah, there's nice sounds, nice images. It's just untethered. I don't know where it goes. Okay, well, let's move on. Well, Dick Westheimer puts it this way. I read this one last one. I think the poet has a great sense of sound. Now they need to let sound lead them to meaning. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's move on. And that poet, once again, was Partha Sarkar. Let's go to the next poet. And next up is Enrico Kumbo, from Toronto, Canada. So 2 poems here. Enrico says, these are 2 of my latest poems out of hundreds, not terribly earth-shattering, but somewhat typical of my day, of my interest and approach. I'd like to know what works and what doesn't in these poems. The Mappa Mundi 3 refers to the medieval world maps brought to the present. The 3. Okay. So we have 2 poems here by Enrique Kumbo. And here they are. So Stages is first up. Stages. The daily repertoire of living on the stage. The crowds attentive In their way, some enthralled, others vaguely staring at the garish curtains bundled to the side, others still indifferent to the whole affair, marks the daily rounds of knowing how to act, how best to gauge your passing presence, center stage, when and where to hide, what sort of guarding mask to wear, strutting, running, meekly walking, bearing left and right, up and down, center, off, back and forth, all formal stages in the constant drama constantly performed, mannered, seasoned, standard everywhere. Before the garish curtain tumbles down, marks the point of no return, and promptly ends the whole affair. So I like the energy of that poem. We kind of get with these lists of verbs. We sort of rush forward in a nice way. The daily repertoire of living on the stage, and I do wonder, why not make this the title? We kind of repeat stages. Stages is sort of a labely title, whereas why not have that the title? And then it's just a condension. It just saves us some time and some space and makes the poem feel more tight and more, Amy Dower Solorzano says, I like the escalation momentum in the list. Yeah, me too. Okay, so why not make this the title? And then let's go through a little bit. The crowd's attentive in their way, some enthralled. I think there should be God, what's the word for the little comma? God, why can't I? Apostrophe. Jeez. Now, there was one that I couldn't pull up. There should be an apostrophe there. Crowds in their way, some enthralled, others vaguely staring at the garish curtains bundled to the side. I love that, garish curtains bundled to the side. We repeated garish later, and since you had that garish curtains, I wouldn't pull back to garish again, but I like it here a lot. Staring at the garish curtains bundled on the side, a really nice description and really condensed form. Others still indifferent to the whole affair, marks the daily rounds of knowing how to act, how best to gauge your passing presence center stage, when and where to hide, what sort of guarded mask to wear, strutting, running, meekly walking, bearing left and right. Someone pointed out meekly walking, and meekly walking, it does stand out in a way, because it's the only one that's modified, and I think meekly is a sort of a strange modification to walking to use there. If you're going to have one thing that's done in a way, the meekly walking seems a little odd to me. Rose says no apostrophe up at the beginning. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess you're right. There's a implied verb, are. The crowd's attentive in their way, some enthralled. Yeah. Well, I'd put the are there so no one trips over it, because it's one of those things. There are a lot of things in reading where if you you have to sort of guess in order to understand anything about reading a sentence. There's a lot of sort of guesses you can have to make. There's little ambiguities, and if you go the wrong way, if you force a ambiguity in there and you force the reader to make a choice, they're going to make one choice or the other, and then you get kind of locked into that and confused. That's a really great example of how that works. So my first reading of that was that it should be an apostrophe, and it's tough to see it in any other way, and then you trip over it, and there's really no clue that that's the way it should be read. And so if you're going to have the crowds are, if you're going to have that suggested verb there of are, just put it in. Don't leave the ambiguity, because then you get and throw people off and it get confusing. And why do we want to? We don't want to talk about your response to the being on stage. We don't want to talk about whether or not there should be an apostrophe. Yeah. And Marie Berg points out the crowd throughout the poem seems singular. See, we're just talking about this thing that just shouldn't matter at all. So either put an apostrophe or put the are. Don't leave it ambiguous, because then we get thrown off. Let's see. Well, anyway, so yeah. Or a mass marks the daily rounds of knowing how to act, how best to gauge your passing presence center stage. So there's that gauge stage internal rhyme there, which is nice. When and where to hide, what sort of guarded mask to wear. Strutting, running, meekly walking. I think we could do a different word there. I agree. bearing left and right, up and down, center off, back and forth, all formal stages and the constant drama constantly performed. I like the repetition of constant there, that little modification. It's a nice sound. Mannered, seasoned, standard, everywhere before the garish curtain. And again, a garish I wouldn't repeat, although someone points out a nice rhyme. Yeah, it's Amy Dower Solarzano says, if we omitted the first instance of garish, there's a nice echo with garish and affair in the final lines. That's nice. That's true. So maybe you want to pull out the first garish and replace it with something else there. Because a word like that, you don't see very often. It stands out, and it pulls you out of the poem, and it makes you be reminded that someone's writing you a poem when you get instances like that. Tumbles down, marks the point of no return, and promptly ends the whole affair. Yeah, okay. So it ends the whole affair. That's nice. Debty says all life's a stage. Yeah. Okay. So what else to say about this poem? Yeah. Stages. So I like some of this. And if we had a better title, and a few little polish ups, it's kind of a nice poem. Let me see what people are saying over here. Let's see. Jane Middleton says, I think, let's see. Okay, well, anyway. Okay, I think we'll move on. I think that's what I have to say about that poem. Some little edits here. Barb Christing says, moving across the stage with confidence is what makes for a great actor. The narrator of this poem presents himself as unsure. Yeah, and I think that's the point, though. I mean, there's an anxiety and stress that go into it. Liska says maybe slinking instead of meekly walking. That would be nice, because then you don't have the bore. You have running. Walking is really too boring, and maybe that was the impulse that made you want to modify walking to make it an interesting walk. But if you went strutting, running, slinking, I think that's a really good suggestion, Liska. James Spencer says, as a former actor, I want more. I think the exchange of energy between actor and audience is definitely poetic, but this rests on the surface. Yeah. Yeah, I agree too. I think that's a good point. And again, I think we always want more. We want as much stuffed into a poem as possible. And again, here, I think we could, push the poem farther. Jamie Thomas suggests The Unsure Actor isn't a terrible title and could reconcile the tone a little. Winston Munn points out it seems like a metaphor for life. And I agree so too. So I think, yeah, I like the ends of the whole affair. I like that last line. The kind of resignation in that is nice. Let's take a look at the other poem. And this is Mapamundi 3. And that refers to, I guess, medieval maps. Mapamundi 3. The latest rendering of the world comprises lands entirely known with proper people in their proper places. Halfway proper places thronged with halfway proper people. Fairly near, though always crude, barbaric, vulgar, dark, the lands unknown, distant, foreign places rife with strange, unholy creatures, monsters, horrifying beasts, ogres, ghouls, unclean spirits, demons, fallen angels, headless trolls, one-eyed vile abominations far away, all things ordered in their rightful place, with proper people near enough, and demons, monsters, beasts, and halfway proper people far enough away to keep forever lordship and faith in grand eternal ordered, bound as God Almighty first intended, bearing out his cosmic primal mapping of creation. And so that was Mapamundi 3. And I'm not sure what the 3 is. I mean, maybe there technically is a 3, the latest rendering of the world. And the rendering of the world feels a little bit computerish in a strange way, which is interesting. The latest rendering of the world comprises lands entirely with proper people in their proper places. And technically the hyphen there are not, you don't need those hyphens. Yeah, Hallie was saying the same thing. Many of the hyphens are unnecessary. It's true. And not in a way, there's sometimes where you can play with hyphens to make noun phrases out of things, but that doesn't really work here. Yeah, and Amy Dower Solorzano says, I like lists and repetition, but I think this one could be a little wearisome to read. And yeah, I think the lists, there's too much relying on lists. I think the lists are nice here. We have these crude, barbaric, vulgar, dark, and lands unknown, distant, foreign places rife with strange, unholy creatures. There's nice detail and a good tactile quality to the sounds of that. It feels rich, but it's just a lot of lists, and it sort of feels like we're having the same sort of constructions over and over again. Yeah. So Chelsea McClellan says yes, a video game. Let's see. So. Yeah, Rose says, where's the turn? Where's the discovery? Yeah. So Mapamundi 3. And where could you put a discovery in this? Like, how would a turn happen? The latest rendering of the world comprises lands entirely known with proper people in their proper places, halfway proper places thronged with halfway proper people, fairly near, though always crude, barbaric, vulgar, dark, and lands unknown, distant, foreign places rife with strange, unholy creatures, monsters. So we have this nice tendency to pick up an energy as the poem goes. I think it's one of the things the poet has going for them as a writer, is a nice energy that builds. But then he leans on that a little too much, and that's why the lists go on a little too much. We need to shift tones and shift gears and mix it up a little bit too. The lands unknown, distant, foreign places rife with strange and holy creatures, monsters, horrifying beasts, ogres, ghouls, unclean spirits, demons, fallen angels, headless trolls, one-eyed vile abominations, far away all things ordered in place in their rightful place. So is this like trying to be a turn here? Far away, all things ordered in their rightful place, with proper people near enough, and demons, monsters, beasts, and halfway proper people far enough away to keep forever lordship, faith, and grand eternal order ordered, bound as Almighty God first intended, bearing out his cosmic primal mapping of creation. Yeah. Jamie Thomas suggests the end could come with unplugging the computer, brings a full stop after the driving forward. Yeah, so it's sort of making a commentary. And as somebody said earlier, like, where's the discovery? That was Rose. Where's the turn? Where's the discovery? And it feels like a description. Like, I had this thought that maps are laid out orderly. Then I described the way maps are laid out orderly with some energy and some nice description, some nice detail. But then why? Why was it interesting to me? Why was it something that I wanted to and that's the thing that's missing here, is that sense of why the poem had to be written. What was the thing? What was the itch that I'm scratching? the resolution I'm trying to find, the mystery I'm trying to solve in writing this poem. And, I'm not sure that works. But as Jamie said, unplugging the computer at the end would also shift the author to God. That's kind of an interesting concept. Winston Munn says, I think the turn goes from good people to bad people and monsters. Amy Dower Solorzano says, I think there's a turn there, but I think the list has consumed the poem, and the reader is too drunk on sounds and repetition to find it. That could be. Yeah, and Chelsea McClellan says, I get the comparison between the video game and the ideal world, but there is nothing to make me feel it, even as a Christian. Yeah, so the idea that we have this so orderedness to the world, where everything far away is bad, and it's sort of an interesting thought, but I feel like it's not developed. Yeah, Bob Kreising says, even if the demons and halfway proper people are far away, they still exist and still fill a space on the map, so God's intentions of creation and mapping are not realized. Yeah. Annie Blanchard said, I'm so sick today, everything is going over my head. I'm sorry, Annie. I'm sorry to hear that. I was sick last week, if you missed it. It was pretty rough on the Rattlecast. Feel much better. Hope you feel better soon, Annie. let's see. Well, I think it's sort of like an idea that didn't push. Deb T says I didn't know it was a video game. I didn't know that either, and I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure if that's the rendering. That's how like a map is rendered. There's that's how video games kind of function. Is rendered as you move. Yeah. Sorry for giving it to you, Annie. Winston Munn says there's a comment I think about nationalism, and yeah, I think so too, and that we do that with our maps. There's that. There's a really great meme. That's like shows two sides of fighting medieval countries over like a body of water, and it shows like just the way that the thoughts are just mirrored, and it's kind of going that way. But I don't know. I feel like it's not dug into deep enough. Yeah, push the concept further. It's got legs. Great paraphrase, Rose. That's Rose saying that. Yeah, so it's an interesting concept, but didn't explore it enough. Dig more, and how you dig more is moving out, like shifting in tone, and like figuring out who's actually speaking. That's another thing that having this sort of one way of moving, like sort of one kind of energy in the poem. It doesn't allow a lot of sense of movement, whereas having a really nuanced voice that feels very discreet and like an actual person can shift register and tone and move and make a different observation. And they feel sort of locked into their one direction by the one mode of pushing out the poem, if that makes sense. So finding a way, like looking at the way people make turns in poems and the way you change your sense of perspective and register, and there's a shift in the tone of it, that can help push the poems deeper into a more interesting exploration of the subject matter. Cindy Gutherman says an idea that doesn't finish. Yeah, and it doesn't. It just sort of sits in the one spot it started with, which is an interesting idea, but push and see what's beneath there. Dig deeper. Okay, let's move on. Next poet in line, we are up to. Submittable logged me out. Hang on. Okay, we are up to February 4th this year, so 5 months ago. Kim Burley from Held Green Cheadle in the UK. Okay. No Thing is the title. No general questions. Just a short poem pasted in. Let's take a look. And again, this is a no thing. There is nothing within these lines. The uncaught hand of the fallen nails digging into a palm, that split-second chance of connection lost. Gravity and time pulling as I scratch at smooth surfaces, grab at missing holds. I couldn't have stopped anyway, for my journey is dictated. If only I could sit back, watch the view, have confidence in the driver. I'm awake again, foot slamming invisible brakes, so I want to drive. But these are foreign roads. I'd never be able to navigate them. It doesn't feel the point. Let me object. Moments are not the collected sand in an hourglass. Those grains can scatter on the wind. I open my hand, stare at the lifeline, and choose some wallpaper. I open my hand, stare at the lifeline, and choose some wallpaper. Well, choosing the wallpaper is a really big turn. It's interesting. I'm not sure I can piece it together what just happened. But that was at least surprising. When we talked about the last poem staying in its like one rut, or one like, maybe rut's maybe not the right word, but one lane, and not being able to shift around. And I think it's a good metaphor maybe is, you have like 3 lanes of traffic, and if you only drive in the one lane, you really can't pass anybody. You're stuck following the car ahead of you, and that's kind of what happened with the last poem. This one takes a big lane change in the last line, which is interesting. But as Deb T says, or Hamat Malak says, I'm a little bit lost. Deb T says, we need a helpful title for this one. And the no thing was not helpful. This was the title. So what could we come up with as a title that helps us? Because I do feel a little bit lost in this poem. Where are we at first? The foot slamming invisible brakes. Are we actually a passenger in a car? So set us up a little bit. Let's see. Then Jacob says change the title to Choosing Wallpaper After the Divorce. That's funny. I don't know. But think again how After the Divorce is a nice title to everything. There is nothing within these lines. The uncaught hand. Oops, sorry. I was looking at the wrong screen. There is nothing within these lines. The uncaught hand of the fallen nails digging in the palm. So I do think that they're literally being driven somewhere. I think that's not a metaphor, but it's a little. It's just we don't really get situated there. So the title, driving back from JFK Airport or something like that, would help us know. Or Ubering back from JFK Airport would help us know what's going on in this poem. There's nothing within these lines. The uncaught hand of the fallen nails. I'm not sure why it's uncaught. Nails digging into a palm that's... And again, we get no punctuation. I don't know why I said again. But we get no punctuation here, which makes the that seem like it reads from the last line and it's just enjambment, when really there's a break there. And so that's why punctuation helps. It's tempting not to sometimes, and you can do it if you're skilled and play with it well. But there it confuses us. Nails digging into a palm. It's really like a comma or something. That split-second chance of connection, loss, gravity, and time pulling as I scratch at smooth surfaces. Grab at missed holds. See, at this point, I'm thinking it's like a metaphor, and we're not literally anywhere. But then later, I think we are. So I'm a little confused there. I could have stopped anyway, for my journey is dictated if only I could sit back. So here I'm really thinking it's just a metaphor, but what is the journey? That's why the title can help or just reveal something, because I have no idea what the journey is. Why do I care about what is your journey and why should I care about your journey? Tell us the story again. Tell us the story, please. If only I could sit back, watch the view, have confidence in the drive, or I'm awake again, foot slamming invisible brakes, so I want to drive. So the foot slamming invisible brakes takes me back to thinking it's literal, and we're actually in a car. Yeah. So I'm just a little lost. So I so want to drive, but these are foreign roads. I've never been able to navigate them. It doesn't feel the point. Let me object. Moments are not the collected sand in an hourglass. Those grains can scatter on the wind. Scatter on the wind is something we want to avoid. Very cliched image and line there. I open my hand, stare at the lifeline. Our nails were digging into our palms before, so that's interesting. And choose some wallpaper is strange. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel lost in this poem. I don't get it. I like the turn to the wallpaper, though. That's interesting. Yeah, because of within these lines, in the first line, says Brian O'Sullivan, I think it could be an ars poetica with it driving, and I think maybe climbing as a metaphor. Yeah, James Spencer says we lose track of what is being metaphorized. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Rachel Valenzuela says maybe the journey is dictated by a phone's navigation. Can't get around without it. That's interesting too, But see, we're speculating about what it's actually about. PMB says maybe it's a panic attack in a Home Depot. And, wallpaper, hourglasses, driving, palm reading. Maria Berg says I think she's remembering a trip she took while trying to pick out wallpaper. I mean, we're just sort of speculating about what the poem is about, and this is what you don't want readers to have to do. Like, we don't want to be sitting here, first of all, when we read the poem, if it were in a magazine or a Rattle or online or whatever, we wouldn't have a group of 40 people being able to sit around and talk about what the poem might be about. And that's not a feeling you want to leave with people. We have to know what's going on. Like, tell us a story. Let us know what the situation actually is so we can experience it and understand our lives better, because we all are living lives, Yep, Shauna Gammon says not precise enough if everyone has to guess. Exactly. So we're spending too much time guessing, and that's the issue. So give us some context, some nice lines there in the poem. All right. Now let's do one more. We'll do one more. Why not? It's 5 past the hour. And last but not least is Mark Budman. Okay, I know Mark slightly. He's a fiction writer. He's on my Facebook friends list. So hi, Mark. Let's see. But he writes poems as well. He sent 3. We can only look at 2, but we'll look at 2. It does say in the guidelines, like up to 2 is preferable. So The Curious Case is his first poem. The Curious Case, and Mark is from Brighton, Massachusetts. Okay. Here we go. So it's The Curious Case. Let me take a sip of coffee before I read some more. If I lived my life backward, curiously, like Benjamin Button, then I'd lift the tips of my fingers off the keyboard, get up and leave before typing this poem. I like that. That's a nice start. I drop my cat off my knees as I get ready to pet him. I dress before making love, put my shoes on before entering the security line at the airport, walk away when the immigration official greeted me in New York on my first arrival in America. Oh, that's nice. See, that's a nice reveal of story. It's not a turn. But it's a progression of story, and see how that we didn't realize he was talking about emigrating to America. So it's a nice sense of a life story told in reverse that way. It's a nice setup to that. I'd watch the glass reassemble itself under my foot at my wedding, go to school unlearning something new every day, watching the fist of a bully running away from my face and shedding hair from my privates and armpits. And much later, I'd draw my first cry. Afterward, I'd swim in the darkness, listening to my mother's heartbeat, then fall apart. Well, that's interesting. Again, this feels too, I'm looking for the turn and for the sort of sense of progression in this poem. But it doesn't really have that, but it has a steady reveal to it. Yeah, so The Curious Case. And it's after, I think it's... yeah. Amy Dower Solorzano says, I enjoy thought experiment poems like this. Yeah, it's fun. And it's nicely described, too. So it sort of tells the life story. Yeah. Gary Rustin says, what is it with what I call metapoems, poems about writing the poem they are in? Well, I think we all spend too much time writing poems, maybe, or maybe not enough. But we spend a lot of time writing, and you write about your experience. Yeah, Marie Burke says it's lacking conflict. Yeah, it's a sort of poem I'm waiting to get to the point, is the thing. It's described really well. Yeah, Nate Jacobs says, beautiful actually, but needs some twist, some tension, a bit of danger to take me somewhere new and exciting. Yeah, that's something Dick Westheimer used to talk about a lot and still does, that a poem should have a sense of danger to it. And really that's kind of the thing, dangerous honesty is really the compelling quality of poetry. It's telling your life honestly, which is sometimes dangerous to do and feels that way. And watching somebody do something dangerous is compelling because we want to learn how to do dangerous things too, really. So, yeah. And so where is that element in this poem? What's compelling about it? Dr. Hughes says reverse history, but not turn. And yeah, so how would you make a turn out of it? Like, what would you do? So let's read through and just think about that, because line by line, it's a nice poem. I like the way it's revealed. I like the progression. I'm never bored, and things are described nicely. So, yeah. Dick Westheimer says, Frost called it legitimate danger. Yeah, okay, thanks, Dick. Yeah, legitimate danger. And Winston Munn says, I don't see the poet learned what he didn't know he knew. And that's the thing. Like what did we discover in the act of writing this poem? We come to that question so much. So let's read it one more time, because line by line it's nice, but where can we go? How could we make an ending that worked? If I lived my life backward, curiously, like Benjamin Button, then I'd lift the tips of my fingers off the keyboard, get up and leave before typing this poem. I dropped my cat off my knees as I got ready to pet him. I dressed before making love, put my shoes on before entering the security line at the airport, walk away when the immigration officials greeted me at New York on my first arrival in America. I'd watch the glass reassemble itself under my foot at my wedding, go to school, unlearning something new every day, watching the fist of a bully running away from my face and shedding hair and for my privates and armpits. I don't think that's accurate. Shedding hair, it would be like absorbing it, right? I think that's a little off. And much later, I'd draw my first cry. Afterward, I'd swim in the darkness, listening to my mother's heartbeat. And then I'd fall apart. like I am now without you. I mean, that would be a sort of a cheesy, place to go. But something like that. Like, what can this be? How can we extend this out? If we think about it like a haiku, how could we have a leap there at the end? That's kind of what's missing. Or not really kind of, it is what's missing, is that sense. If it were a haiku structure, even though it's really well done, it'd be like the first two lines of the haiku and not the third after the cut. Let's see. PMB says that the final lines were in order of 3, 2, 1, it would work. So let's see. And much later, I'd draw my first cry and then fall apart, listening to my mother's heartbeat. Afterward, I'd swim in the darkness. I think it'd work a little better. I think you're right, PMB. I think it'd work a little better if you reverse the order of those. If you fall apart and then, because there's a mystery of like what happens. Actually, maybe that's the thing. It sort of sets up, and that's the opportunity. It sets up an exploration of what is before the Big Bang, kind of. Like, what would happen if you were living in reverse? Where would you be after that initial thing? And maybe that's what, falling apart is dissatisfying at that point. But if we reverse it and go somewhere after that inflection point, maybe that'd make it interesting. Let's see. Oh, PMB says no, reverse the whole poem. Well, what would that be? Like, Winston Munn says, tell us about being an immigrant. Yeah, I'm just not sure, PMB. So it ends with if I live my life backwards. Oh, then that would kind of make it a turn. Well, it's a sort of a surprise turn. Let's see. So if afterward I'd swim in the darkness, listening to my mother's heartbeat, I'd watch the glass reassemble itself under my foot at my wedding. I'd drop my cat off my knees and get ready. If I live my life backwards, curiously like Benjamin Button, then I lift the tips of my fingers off the keyboard, get up, and leave before typing this poem. So if you read the stanzas backward, that might work a little better. It does have a more satisfying sense of turn there. But Winston Munn says, tell us about being an immigrant. And I think that's more, I don't know. I mean, it feels like this wants to be a metaphor for something. It wants to let us understand some experience better, and it doesn't do that. So where can you go after the end, I think? Brandon Sullivan says, I know it's not a practical revision suggestion, but a word unit palindrome in this scenario would be cool. It definitely would. Yeah. Oh, there was an extra line. Oh my gosh. I thought that was the title of the next poem. So we do have an extra line. I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time. So we have, afterward I'd swim in the darkness, listening to my mother's heartbeat, then fall apart, finally, like everyone else. So that's an interesting thought experiment. We were asking for an extra line because it felt like it was missing a turn after that. And then there one is, finally, like everyone else. So we've just cut off and hidden on the next page. So how do you like that? Does that do enough? Is that enough? It is fulfilling what we were asking for, which is interesting. Afterward, I'd swim in the darkness, listening to my mother's heartbeat, and then fall apart, finally, like everyone else. I think, for me, it's unsatisfying still, because we don't have any kind of, like, new understanding over it. Saying that everyone falls apart, especially we're talking about going backwards, too. I don't think it's enough, but if it was finally... I don't know. If there was some kind of detail in the way that it was falling apart, I think that could make it work. Here you go. So James Spencer says, finally, like everything else, contains a bliss of ignorance. Well, that's an interesting idea there. Yeah, but it seems like finally, like everyone else, something. Yeah. I mean, it's just still not quite enough. It's similar. Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Hughes is not enough of a turn with the final line. Yeah. Maria Berg says, good tip to put one of two at the bottom of a 2-page poem. It definitely is. It definitely is. I hate that experience, which is why we have a little ellipses on the bottom corner when a poem goes on to the next page in Rattle, because I hate that feeling like it's going to end and then and then it doesn't end. Interestingly, a lot of times we get this. We talk a lot about how we haven't seen it a lot lately because I don't know, we just haven't in the critique of the week. But a common thing to see in submissions is to have the last line go on too far and explain away the sort of mystery and intrigue of the poem. And a lot of times it'll happen where you'll read to the bottom and you'll say, oh, that's nice. And then you read this bad stanza that's like hidden in the end. And you're like, oh man, the poem really ends there. And yeah. And so this is a pleasant surprise. Whereas I think just as often when you have it broken over in a surprise ending, it's a negative. Anyway, Annie Blanche said, I'd like to start all over again. Start all over again is a good idea. Was it someone else's suggestion, Annie? Yeah. Well. Finally, like everyone else. Yeah, I feel like it doesn't lean into that ending and really say what it found. And I think still all the same stuff applies. It didn't go far enough. I agree with, as Dr. Q said. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem from Mark. And that was a good poem though. And I hope we didn't get strung up too far. Was there anything else? I think I do want to say one more thing that I kind of glossed over because we were focusing so much on the ending and the sense of movement in the poem. I dress before making love, put my shoes on before entering the security line at the airport, walk away when the immigration official greeted me in New York on my first arrival in America. I was going to say, and I forgot to, I just cut this. Or maybe make it, or cut the New York. Greeted me on my first arrival. I don't know. It feels redundant. I think that two lines could be one. It could be condensed down to one. For the ending, here's a suggestion from Rochelle Venezuela. Finally, like everyone else, I turn the lights out or turn off the TV kind of thing. Yeah, something, some kind of surprise there. We had that really interesting with the wallpaper in the last poem. And that's the way to go. I mean, the poem is really close. I think there's really good details. It's nicely done. One thing, great. Maria just read my mind. The need to know the movie is one of those pop culture yes or no questions. And one thing I wanted to add, too, is that I think having it tied to The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which is a movie, I think it's based on a novel, too, right? It's a concept. I don't think it's a concept that's unique enough to want to tie it to something so fixed in time as a movie that wasn't even a big hit. I think who'd that have? Brad Pitt is the Benjamin Button guy, I think. I don't know if I actually watched it. I think I might have started watching it and gotten bored on a plane, maybe. But I think the poem is done a bit of a disservice to tie it to that movie, because it's a concept moving backward through time isn't something that was like some brilliant thing that the movie writer thought of that no one ever had. It's something that sort of every kid thinks about in the same way every kid thinks about walking on the ceiling and having step over the fan. It's sort of a common concept that we've explored and taken a little bit farther. Deb T says it's an F. Scott Fitzgerald story. Okay. Yeah. And if there were particular details in this poem that had to do with a movie that was continuously referencing the movie, I would do that. But I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't bother referencing because I think it ties the poem too much to something that doesn't really add to it. So I would get rid of the Benjamin Button and just say, if I lived my life backward, and that could be the title. If I lived my life backward, I'd lift the tips of my fingers off the keyboard, get up and leave before typing this poem, and have that be the start. So that's, I felt bad because we were talking about needing a last ending line and I had one, but now we got a little more detail that can be helpful. But I would get rid of that Benjamin Button reference. Okay. Okay. And let's take a look at this other poem before we wrap it up. And this is a short one, English Grammar. She confuses thee and a, the immigrant's muse. She shivers. She hates the climate. The sun is lukewarm here, she muses, and winds are headstrong. Her fingers, icicles, crimsoned on the tips, slash the air when she speaks. She's not Guinevere, for sure, and I'm not Lancelot. She dictates softly while I write. Every exclamation point is like Excalibur thrust between us by the hand of angry Arthur. Interesting. Yeah. So English grammar, again, I think there's really great details and a nice brevity, a condensed storytelling going on here from Mark. Again, these are poems by Mark Budman. English grammar. She confuses thee and a, the immigrant's muse. I like the start. She shivers. She hates the climate. The sun is lukewarm here, she muses, and winds are headstrong. I really like that start. Her fingers, icicles, crimsoned at the tips, slash the air when she speaks. Now, I'm not sure about going to the Arthur. It seems like strange. I mean, it seems a leap to me, and I'm not sure. It wasn't really set up. It's a short poem, so to talk about the setup, but it's a, to extend that metaphor, it doesn't feel inevitable. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like we were going there. It feels like suddenly we went there for some reason. She's not Guinevere for sure. Maybe I'm missing a detail about the story of King Arthur. But she's not Guinevere for sure, and I'm not Lancelot. I just don't understand that line. Like, why would it go there? She dictates softly while I write. I like that. Going back, I like the unraveling of this tiny little scene in the poem. PNB says, can we muse out loud, or is it only a thought? No, I think we definitely muse out loud. She dictates softly while I write. Every exclamation point is, I wouldn't say like. I think it's always stronger if you use direct metaphor rather than that, or it tends to be, than using the analogy sort of structure. So every exclamation point is Excalibur thrust between us by the hand of angry Arthur. And Michelle Noble says the last line is redundant, and I agree. I think that, if we're just doing the poem on its own as it fits here in modifying that, I would modify it down to every exclamation point is Excalibur thrust between us. And then that would be it. By the hand of angry Arthur doesn't add a lot. I don't understand the I don't understand going to sorry. I don't understand going to going so strongly into the King Arthur story. A sun. This is Annie Blanchard says, that makes me wonder where this is, and icicles that are crimson at the tips. Very alien sounding. I think her fingers are crimson. Like it's like she's really cold and blood's rushing there to try to keep them warm, I guess. Brandon Sutherland says, not sure, but maybe she's not Guinevere because she's more passionate about language than any Lancelot? Yeah, I'm not sure, but I like the little scene. And I'm wondering if maybe... is she reading? King Arthur? Jamie Thomas says, we were reading about the Round Table would be a good line to tie English grammar to the king. Yeah, that's what I was getting at just now. Great. So, good line to tie the English grammar and the King Arthur references. Seems like they're in a library. Yeah. And so if the title were, reading King Arthur out loud or reading Sir Gawain out loud or whatever, then we would sort of feel it a little better. Debty says he's talking about his muse. Hamat Palak says nail polish. Oh, yeah, nail polish on the crimson tips. So cold fingers with those crimson tips. Debty says, I think the speaker is talking about his muse. She confuses thee and a, the immigrant's muse. So is he, directly talking to her muse? She shivers. She's the muse. She hates the climate. The sun is lukewarm here, she mused. I like the muse musing. The winds are headstrong. Her fingers, icicles, crimson on the tips, slash the air when she speaks. She's not Guinevere. There's a nice air Guinevere. Nice slant rhyme there in the middle. For sure, I'm not Lancelot. And I'm not Lancelot. She dictates softly while I write. Every exclamation point is Excalibur thrust between us. So if we had some reason, it just feels to me like... it's just random to talk about King Arthur. It doesn't feel like it fits. But if we had a reason, like somebody suggested within the title, of making it so the title sort of explains why that's coming up, that would make sense. But I don't understand that aspect of it. Otherwise, I kind of like the poem, cut down as we cut the ending off. It'd be one of those poems where, we get those in submissions, and I always think like, oh, I like this poem a lot. Does it do enough? Did it go far enough? In the same way that we saw really clearly with talking about whether or not this last line, finally like everyone else, did that go enough? Did that surprise me enough to be memorable? I wonder if you could, and I'm not sure what it might. It's like close. Can we go back to the and a? Why this particular thing being confused is so important? Can we like put an example in? Like it's an interesting idea, but it's sort of listed like one thing in a list of things that are possible and doesn't really apply. If there was something to do with the King Arthur story that had to do with that whatever that's called. What's it called? The difference between the and a, the indefinite and definite articles. If there was something to do with whether it was a definite or indefinite article changed the way you read the story, like why not pull an example in toward the end? And maybe it can be from King Arthur. That would make a lot of sense. PMB says, or confuse a and the throughout the whole poem. That'd be nice. Yeah. Let's see. Rose says there is an example, but Tim is reading it as if the grammar wasn't confused. Okay. So I'm reading, which line is that? In the sun line. Yeah. That's true, but so that line it does. And that's the impetus for that. But I mean like later in the poem. To do with the King Arthur. Like, why did we spend half the poem talking about King Arthur? It feels like that should be an example. Like, the poem would feel satisfying if that was an example where that made a big difference. Whereas in the beginning, it's just an example. Yeah. Trying to see. Rachel Valenzuela says, I think Guinevere was a queen that had an affair with Lancelot. Can't remember. Yeah, is there something there? I mean, if there could be some detail to that story where that grammar would make a difference. Yeah, Lancelot and Guinevere. So Hamat Malak said after King Arthur's divorce. That's funny. Thanks, Hamat. Michelle Noble says Lancelot and Guinevere, they had a love affair. James Spencer says Janakian has a great poem about how his immigrant families is English could be informative or clarifying about how much can be explained and still discovered. Yeah. And Gary Rosen says there are only two these and no A's as a substitute for either. Yeah. Yeah. Rachel Venezuela again says she's not like Guinevere and he isn't like Lancelot, so nothing happened there. PMP says that's why they call him Lance-a-lot. That's funny. And maybe he called him Lance the Lot in the poem. Yeah. I don't know. So how can you pull that in, and how can you make this Lancelot part feel like it's necessary and interesting? That's the thing that's missing here, but it's an interesting poem. I like it a lot. All right, we got to wrap it up. That's been a long critique of the week. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. It's been a whole lot of fun. Oh, yeah, click the like button if you haven't yet, of course. How many? I don't know. It's not showing me likes for some reason. Maybe my screen's not big enough or something. But I'm sure that a lot of people haven't liked it. If you like this, click the like button. Really helps a lot. Have this appear randomly, then people get to learn a little bit about poetry, and we all do in the process. So thanks for participating and for doing that. Now that's going to do it for the critique of the week for today. Next up on the Rattlecast is going to be this Sunday, of course, back to the regular time after an early show last week for Malal bin or Maz bin Bilal, I should say. This week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Carrie Gunter Seymour. And we love Carrie. She was interviewed in the Appalachian Poets issue. She appeared originally in Rattlecast 48, which is amazing that there's 200 episodes in between her last appearance and this one. It's kind of, it's a long time. That's like 4 years. We've been doing this a long time. But anyway, this is Carrie Gunter Seymour. She has new books, Dirt Songs. We were talking about great book, Place Inside America, A Place So Deep Inside America Can't Be Seen is her previous book. She's a current poet laureate of Ohio and does a whole bunch of stuff in Ohio. She's very active and very energetic and a really wonderful person. We're really looking forward to talking to her again. That's Carrie Gunter Seymour. The prompt for this week was to, let me pull it up. It's been a spell. It's write a guzzle, right? Write a traditional guzzle. Let's see. Write a traditional guzzle. Oh, I didn't do it on page. Hang on. Write a traditional guzzle that references at least one other poet. That was the other detail. When submitting, include the name of the poet's reference in the submission note so we know that you actually done that aspect. So write a traditional guzzle that references at least one other poet. That is your prompt for this week. No poetry space out yet today, but we'll be dropping one tomorrow. We're going to do one tonight with Katie Dozier, and we got in late last night, or kind of pulled an all-nighter and tried to do it and didn't get to do it in time. So we're going to do it tonight and post it tomorrow. That'd be a fun episode talking about how to write a poem. So look for that Saturday morning. Then Sunday, the Rattlecast 253 with Carrie Gunter Seymour. The regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night. Or good day, I guess. Bye.